Transformation in the private sector is still far from set targets. Black representation on JSE-listed boards was only 38% last year, while black ownership declined by over 5% compared to a year earlier. Joining us now is the Deputy President of the Black Management Forum, Dumisani Mpafa. Dumisani, thanks for your time, appreciate it. Let's pick up what the DA is saying about BEE. It's not working. Do you agree?
Good evening, and thanks for having us. Of course, there are challenges with regards to the PE, there's no question about it. But I think let's agree here that the DA is clutching at its straws. The reality is that they have no choice but to implement PE. It's the legislation of the country. It's either they are ignorant about the PE and the PE legislation, even the assertion that PE is not broad enough. In my view, it demonstrates their ignorance about BE, or maybe they're just trying to deflect attention from their own issues. But the reality is that there are challenges with regard to BE, and those challenges emanate from the fact that companies in South Africa that are supposed to be implementing BE are actually not implementing BE the way they should.
Well, isn't that the point, though? Because they're not being implemented like they should, especially when you have JSE-listed boards with only 38% of black representation and then black ownership declining by 5% compared to a year earlier. The DA is saying currently, in its current form, it's not working, and that's why it needs to be amended. This is case in point.
Look, the reality of the situation is that if companies were implementing BE the way they should, for instance, just to give you an example, in terms of Section 13G of the Black Economic Empowerment Act, JSE-listed companies are supposed to report their compliance to the BE Commissioner. And let me tell you that only 121 companies out of more than 400 companies reported. This is just the law, so companies are disobeying the law. You can't compensate for people who are just not willing to comply with the legislation by actually saying, let's drop the law. Who says they're going to comply with whatever alternative mechanism we're going to come up with? People must just comply with the legislation. There's a legislation. Again, the same example that I've given about people not complying, the state-owned companies and all the organs of state, by the way, there are more than 700 of them, they're supposed to report to the BE Commission, but they're just not reporting. Only 121 only reported out of more than 700 that's supposed to. So, pardon me, only 4 reported in terms of SOCs. It's 121 of the JSE-listed companies. People are just not complying, both government and the private sector. It's not being taken seriously. And now, because we're going to the elections, the first thing that people think they can play around so that they can appeal to the emotions of the voters, the first thing they go to BE. And we can't be having this. It's quite unacceptable.
But what you're saying contradicts your point, because you say the current legislation does work and that the DA is being ignorant about it. And I actually don't even want to make this about the DA. What we're seeing happen, you yourself saying that companies are not complying, government's not complying. How is it working if that's the case, if people and government and state organizations and private companies can so easily ignore this legislation?
It's because, let me tell you, the biggest sector in the study that the BE Commission has done, the biggest sector that is doing well is the construction sector. Let me tell you why the construction sector is doing well. It's doing well because their biggest buyers is government, and governments require BE certificates, so they compete for that work, so they comply with legislation, so which means it's doable. Companies can do it, but they refuse to do it because we have not been firm in terms of putting penalties. One of the argument, for instance, that we're putting as the PMF is that we need to have punitive measures because we don't have a lot of punitive measures in terms of PE. You only have penalties on offenses only if you committed fraud or you committed funding. But if you're not committed funding, you simply do not comply, there are no punitive measures. But also the legislation is not compulsory. So all we're saying is that tighten up the legislation instead of dropping it. Because if you're dropping the legislation, who says whatever alternative mechanism you're going to come up with, the companies are going to follow and going to implement it. But also we're saying government should lead. If government is not leading in the agenda of transformation, who's going to lead? Because government must actually be the champion. Now, these SOCs and these state organs, they themselves should implement BE. And one of the things that we're going to be doing as a PMF, we're going to have an engagement with the president. Because the president one of the things that he need to track will be the BE implementation. Because if you do not track BE implementation, who else is going to track it? Who else is going to enforce that these SOCs and all these state organs actually implement BE? But moreover, the JSE-listed companies, we need to have engagement with the JSE. And we once had an engagement, a positive engagement with the JSE. They actually agreed at some point that one of the listing requirements will be, which started June this year, will be, one of the listing requirements will be BEE compliance. And we think we need to go back to them and say, look, we got listed companies that are simple to not comply with BEE by not reporting. And the only reason they will not report is either one, they've not done any BEE verification, so they can't report, or that they've done it, but they're performing very badly to a point that they're embarrassed to even report, which then means that we need to apply punitive measures.
You talk about punitive measures, but we already hear that some companies are, setting aside money to pay the costs if they are fined for not meeting BEE requirements. How is that even going to work if that's the case?
We must go beyond the financial cost implications. Of course, we expect that active shareholders will hold those boards accountable where companies actually set aside for penalties and actually hold them. So we want to promote shareholder activism. That's the first thing. But also we want to go beyond just financial penalties. We want the CEOs and the leaders in this institution to actually take personal responsibility, but actually be taken to jail. Because the actual legislation, it says, is either 10% of your turnover if you commit funding, or up to 10 years jail sentence. Now we're saying it must not only be on funding, but any offense on BEE should attract that jail term for the leadership, because the companies on their own, they're not going to implement BEE, but the CEOs and the boards must actually make sure that the BEE is implemented. Until we've done that, and we make sure that we insist on it, companies are not going to comply with BEE.
Lastly, in a country that strives for equality among its citizens, I'm shocked, and I think it's embarrassing that we're not reaching our targets when it comes to BEE. I think it's also embarrassing that, as you say, government departments are not reaching these targets and adhering to this legislation. So what do you do as an organization apart from going to the president and saying something needs to be done?
Look, we've been lobbying on BEE for far too long. I mean, we've been saying that transformation is in reverse gear, and some people are saying that, they didn't even believe what we're saying. And I think the B-BBEE Commission study that came out actually demonstrated that point. I think out of 4 sectors, they didn't even reach 25% in terms of shareholding. And the list goes on. And one of the things that we think we have not been able to do, and I think is something that we need to do jointly between us as a lobby, a structure and government, is actually to go to the country and explain that if we do not get the BEE right, the stability of this country is under threat.
All right, thank you so much for your time and your insight. Appreciate it.
Lovely, thank you.
That was Deputy President of the Black Management Forum, Dumisani Mpafa. Now,